Good evening and welcome back to Evelina. This evening we meet yet more new characters and continue Evelina's journey through the low life of London. Letter the 42nd. Evelina to the Reverend Mr. Villiers. Holborn, 9th June. Yesterday morning we received an invitation to dine and spend the day at Mr. Brangton's, and Monsieur Dubois, who was also invited, called to conduct us to Snow Hill. Young Brangton received us at the door, and the first words he spoke were, "Do you know, sisters ain't dressed yet." Then hurrying us into the house, he said to me, "Come, miss, you shall go upstairs and catch 'em. I dare say they're at the glass." He would have taken my hand, but I declined this civility, and begged to follow Madame Duval. Mr. Brangton then appeared and led the way himself. We went as before up 2 pair of stairs, but the moment the father opened the door, the daughters both gave a loud scream. We all stopped, and then Miss Brangton called out, "Lord, Papa, what do you bring the company up here for? Why, Polly and I ain't half dressed." "More shame for you," answered he. "Here's your aunt and cousin and Monsieur Dubois all waiting, and ne'er a room to take 'em to." "Who'd have thought of their coming so soon?" cried she. "I am sure for my part I thought Miss was used to nothing but quality hours." "Why, I shan't be ready this half hour yet," said Miss Polly. "Can't they stay in the shop till we're dressed?" Mr. Brangton was very angry and scolded them violently. However, we were obliged to descend, and stools were procured for us in the shop, where we found the brother, who was highly delighted, he said, that his sisters had been catched, and he thought proper to entertain me with a long account of their tediousness, and the many quarrels they all had together. When at length these ladies were equipped to their satisfaction, they made their appearance, but before any conversation was suffered to pass between them and us, they had a long and most disagreeable dialogue with their father, to whose reprimands, though so justly incurred, they replied with the utmost pertness and rudeness, while their brother all the time laughed aloud. The moment they perceived this, they were so much provoked, that instead of making any apologies to Madame Duval, they next began a quarrel with him. "Tom, what do you laugh for? I wonder what business you have to be always a-laughing when Papa scolds us." "Then what business have you to be such a while getting on your clothes? You're never ready, you know well enough." "Lord, sir, I wonder what's that to you? I wish you'd mind your own affairs and not trouble yourself about ours. How should a boy like you know any such thing?" "A boy, indeed! Not such a boy neither. I'll warrant you'll be glad to be as young when you come to be old maids." This sort of dialogue we were amused with till dinner was ready, when we again mounted up 2 pair of stairs. In our way, Miss Polly told me that her sister had asked Mr. Smith for his room to dine in, but he had refused to lend it. "Because," she said, "one day it happened to be a little greased. However, we shall have it to drink tea in, and then perhaps you may see him, and I assure you he's quite like one of the quality, and dresses as fine, and goes to balls and dances, and everything quite in taste. And besides, miss, he keeps a footboy of his own too." The dinner was ill served, ill cooked, and ill managed. The maid who waited had so often to go downstairs for something that was forgotten, that the Brangtons were perpetually obliged to rise from table themselves to get plates, knives and forks, bread or beer. Had they been without pretensions, all this would have seemed of no consequence, but they aimed at appearing to advantage, and even fancied they succeeded. However, the most disagreeable part of our fare was that the whole family continually disputed whose turn it was to rise and whose to be allowed to sit still. When this meal was over, Madame Duval, ever eager to discourse upon her travels, entered into an argument with Mr. Brangton, and in broken English Monsieur Dubois, concerning the French nation, and Miss Polly, then addressing herself to me, said, "Don't you think, miss, it's very dull sitting upstairs here? We'd better go down to shop, and then we shall see the people go by." "Lord, Poll," said the brother, "you're always wanting to be staring and gaping, and I'm sure you needn't be so fond of showing yourself. You're ugly enough to frighten a horse." "Ugly indeed! I wonder which is best, you or me. But I tell you what, Tom, you've no need to give yourself such airs, for if you do, I'll tell Miss of you know what." "Who cares if you do? You may tell her what you will. I don't mind." "Indeed," cried I do not desire to hear any secrets." Oh, but I'm resolved I'll tell you, because Tom's so very spiteful. You must know, miss, t'other night—" "Poll," cried the brother, "if you tell her that, miss shall know all about your meeting young Brown, you know when. So I'll be quits with you one way or another." Miss Polly coloured, and again proposed our going downstairs till Mr. Smith's room was ready for our reception. "Ay, so we will," said Miss Brangton. "I'll assure you, cousin, we have some very genteel people pass by our shop sometimes. Polly and I always go and sit there when we've cleaned ourselves." "Yes, miss," cried the brother, "they do nothing else all day long, when father don't scold them. But the best fun is, when they've got all their dirty things on, and their hair about their ears, sometimes I send young Brown upstairs to them. And then there's such a fuss. Then they hide themselves, and run away and squeal and squall like anything mad. And so I puts the two cats into a room, and I gives them a good whipping, and so that sets them a-squalling too. So there's such a noise and such an uproar, Lord, you can't think, miss, what fun it is." This occasioned a fresh quarrel with the sisters, at the end of which it was at length decided that we should go to the shop. In our way downstairs, Miss Brangton said aloud, "I wonder when Mr. Smith's room will be ready." "So do I," answered Polly. "I'm sure we should not do any harm to it now." This hint had not the desired effect, for we were suffered to proceed very quietly. As we entered the shop, I observed a young man in deep mourning, leaning against the wall, with his arms folded, and his eyes fixed on the ground, apparently in profound and melancholy meditation. But the moment he perceived us, he started, and making a passing bow, very abruptly retired. As I found he was permitted to go quite unnoticed, I could not forbear inquiring who he was. "Lord," answered Miss Brangton, "he's nothing but a poor Scotch poet." "For my part," said Miss Polly, "I believe he's just starved, for I don't find he has anything to live on." "Live upon?" cried the brother. "Why, he's a poet, you know, so he may live upon learning." "I am not good enough for him too," said Miss Brangton, "for he's as proud as he's poor." "Like enough," replied the brother. "But for all that, you won't find he will live without meat and drink. No, no, catch a Scotchman at that if you can. Why, they only come here for what they can get." "I'm sure," said Miss Brangton, "I wonder papa'll be such a fool as to let him stay in the house, for I dare say he'll never pay for his lodging." "Why, no more he would if he could get another lodger. You know the bill has been put up this fortnight. Miss, if you should hear of a person that wants a room, I assure you it is a very good one, for all it's up 3 pair of stairs." I answered that as I had no acquaintance in London, I had not any chance of assisting them, but both my compassion and my curiosity were excited for this poor young man, and I asked them for some further particulars concerning him. They then acquainted me that they had only known him 3 months. When he first lodged with them, he agreed to board also, but had lately told them he would eat by himself, though they all believed he had hardly ever tasted a morsel of meat since he left their table. They said that he had always appeared very low-spirited, but for the last month he had been duller than ever, and all of a sudden had put himself into mourning, though they knew not for whom, nor for what, but they supposed it was only for convenience, as no person had ever been to see or inquire for him since his residence amongst them. And they were sure he was very poor, as he had not paid for his lodgings the past 3 weeks, and finally they concluded he was a poet, well past crazy, because they had at different times found scraps of poetry in his room. They then produced some unfinished verses, written on small pieces of paper, unconnected, and of a most melancholy cast. Among them was the fragment of an ode, which at my request they lent me to copy, and as you may perhaps like to see it, I will write it now. "O life, thou lingering dream of grief, of pain, and every ill that nature can sustain, strange, mutable, and wild, now flattering with hope most fair, depressing now with full despair, the nurse of guilt, the slave of pride, that, like a wayward child, who to himself a foe, sees joy alone in what's denied, in what is granted, woe. O thou poor, feeble, fleeting power, by vice seduced, by folly wooed, by misery, shame, remorse pursued, and as thy toilsome steps proceed, seeming to youth the fairest flower, proving to age the rankest weed, a gilded but a bitter pill, of varied, great, and complicated ill." These lines are harsh, but they indicate an internal wretchedness, which I own affects me. Surely this young man must be involved in misfortunes of no common nature. But I cannot imagine what can induce him to remain with this unfeeling family, where he is most unworthily despised for being poor, and most illiberally detested for being a Scotchman. He may indeed have motives which he cannot surmount for submitting to such a situation. Whatever they are, I most heartily pity him, and cannot but wish it were in my power to afford him some relief. During this conversation, Mr. Smith's footboy came to Miss Brangton, and informed her that his master said she might go have the room now when she liked it, for that he was presently going out. This very genteel message, though it perfectly satisfied the Miss Brangtons, by no means added to my desire of being introduced to this gentleman, and upon their rising with intention to accept his offer, I begged they would excuse my attending them, and said I would sit with Madame Duval till their tea was ready. I therefore once more went up 2 pair of stairs, with young Brangton, who insisted upon accompanying me, and there remained till Mr. Smith's footboy summoned us to tea, when I followed Madame Duval into the dining room. The Miss Brangtons were seated at one window, and Mr. Smith was lolling indolently out of the other. They all approached us at our entrance, and Mr. Smith, probably to show he was master of the apartment, most officiously handed me to a great chair at the upper end of the room, without taking any notice of Madame Duval, till I rose and offered her my own seat. Leaving the rest of the company to entertain themselves, he very abruptly began to address himself to me in a style of gallantry equally new and disagreeable to me. It is true no man can possibly pay me greater compliments or make more fine speeches than Sir Clement Willoughby. Yet his language, though too flowery, is always that of a gentleman, and his address and manners are so very superior to those of the inhabitants of this house, that to make any comparison between him and Mr. Smith would be extremely unjust. This latter seems very desirous of appearing a man of gaiety and spirit, but his vivacity is so low-bred, and his whole behaviour so forward and disagreeable, that I should prefer the company of dullness itself, even as that goddess is described by Pope, to that of this sprightly young man. He made many apologies that he had not lent his room for our dinner, which he said he should certainly have done had he seen me first, and he obliged me that when I came again he should be very glad to oblige me. I told him, and with sincerity, that every part of the house was equally indifferent to me. "Why, ma'am, the truth is, Miss Biddy and Polly take no care of anything else, I'm sure. They should be always welcome to my room, for I am never so happy as in obliging the ladies. That's my character, ma'am. But really, the last time they had it, everything was made so greasy and so nasty, that upon my word, to a man who wishes to have things a little genteel, it was quite cruel. Now, as to you, ma'am, it's quite another thing, for I should not mind if everything I had was spoilt for the sake of having the pleasure to oblige you, and I assure you, ma'am, it makes me quite happy that I have a room good enough to receive you." This elegant speech was followed by many others, so much in the same style that to write them would be superfluous, and as he did not allow me a moment to speak to any other person, the rest of the evening was consumed in a painful attention to this irksome young man, who seemed to intend appearing before me to the utmost advantage. Adieu, my dear sir. I fear you will be sick of reading about this family, yet I must write of them, or not of any, since I mix with no other. Happy shall I be when I quit them all and again return to Berry Hill. Letter the 43rd. And I'm afraid that at this point in the next few pages, I ought to attempt a Scottish accent. However, I'm not very good at Scottish accents, so either you will get nothing at all, or you will get probably Welsh. I can't quite say. Maybe I'll do Welsh and you'll just have to pretend it's Scottish. I'm not sure. We'll see what comes out. It will be a lovely surprise for all of us. Letter the 43rd. Evelina in continuation. 10th June. This morning Mr. Smith called on purpose, he said, to offer me a ticket for the next Hampstead Assembly. I thanked him, but desired to be excused accepting it. He would not, however, be denied, nor answered, and in a manner both vehement and free, pressed and urged his offer till I was wearied to death. But when he found me resolute, he seemed thunderstruck with amazement, and thought proper to desire I would tell him my reasons. Obvious as they must surely have been to any other person, they were such as I knew not how to repeat to him, and when he found I hesitated, he said, "Indeed, ma'am, you are too modest. I assure you the ticket is quite at your service, and I shall be very happy to dance with you, so pray don't be so coy." "Indeed, sir," returned I, "you are mistaken. I never supposed you would offer a ticket without wishing it should be accepted, but it would answer no purpose to mention the reasons which make me decline it, since they cannot possibly be removed." This speech seemed very much to mortify him, which I could not be concerned at, as I did not choose to be treated by him with so much freedom. When he was at last convinced that his application to me was ineffectual, he addressed himself to Madame Duval, and begged she would interfere in his favour, offering at the same time to procure another ticket for herself. "Ma foi, sir," answered she angrily, "you might as well have had the complaisance to ask me before, for I assure you I don't approve of no such rudeness. However, you may keep your tickets to yourself, for we don't want none of 'em." This rebuke almost overset him. He made many apologies, and said that he should certainly have applied first to her, but that he had no notion of the young lady would have refused him, and on the contrary had concluded that she would have assisted him to persuade Madame Duval herself. This excuse appeased her, and he pleaded his cause so successfully that to my great chagrin he gained it, and Madame Duval promised that she would go herself and take me to the Hampstead Assembly whenever he pleased. Mr. Smith then, approaching me with an air of triumph, said, "Well now, ma'am, now I think you can't possibly keep to your denial." I made no answer, and he soon took leave, though not until he had so wonderfully gained the favour of Madame Duval that she declared when he was gone he was the prettiest young man she had seen since she came to England. As soon as I could find an opportunity, I ventured in the most humble manner to entreat Madame Duval not to insist upon my attending her to this ball, and represented to her as well as I was able the impropriety of my accepting any present for a young man so entirely unknown to me. But she laughed at my scruples, called me a foolish, ignorant country girl, and said she should make it her business to teach me something of the world. This ball is to be next week. I am sure it is not more improper than unpleasant to me, and I will use every possible endeavour to avoid it. Perhaps I may apply to Miss Brangton for advice, as I believe she will be willing to assist me, from disliking equally with myself that I should dance with Mr. Smith. 11th June. Oh, my dear sir, I have been shocked to death, and yet at the same time delighted beyond expression, in the hope that I have happily been the instrument of saving a human creature from destruction. This morning Madame Duval said she would invite the Brangton family to return our visit tomorrow, and not choosing to rise herself, for she generally spends the morning in bed, she desired me to wait upon them with her message. Monsieur Dubois, who just then called, insisted upon attending me. Mr. Brangton was in the shop, and told us that his son and daughters were out, but desired me to step upstairs, as he very soon expected them home. This I did, leaving Monsieur Dubois below. I went into the room where we had dined the day before, and by a wonderful chance I happened so to seat myself that I had a view of the stairs, and yet could not be seen from them. In about 10 minutes' time I saw, passing by the door, with a look perturbed and affrighted, the same young man I mentioned in my last letter. Not heeding, as I suppose, how he went, in turning the corner of the stairs, which are narrow and winding, his foot slipped and he fell, but almost instantly rising, I plainly perceived the end of a pistol, which started from his pocket by hitting against the stairs. I was inexpressibly shocked. All that I had heard of his misery occurring to my memory made me conclude that he was at that very moment meditating suicide. Struck with the dreadful idea, all my strength seemed to fail me. He moved on slowly, yet I soon lost sight of him. I sat motionless with terror, all power of action forsook me, and I grew almost stiff with horror, till, recollecting that it was yet possible to prevent the fatal deed, all my faculties seemed to return, with the hope of saving him. My first thought was to fly to Mr. Brangton, but I feared that an instant of time lost might be for ever rued, and therefore, guided by the impulse of my apprehensions, as well as I was able, I followed him upstairs, stepping very softly, and obliged to support myself by the banisters. When I came within a few stairs of the landing-place, I stopped, for I could then see into his room, as he had not yet shut the door. He had put the pistol upon a table, and had his hand in his pocket, whence in a few moments he took out another. He then emptied something on the table from a small leather bag, after which, taking up both the pistols, one in each hand, he dropped hastily upon his knees and called out, "Oh God, forgive me!" In a moment, strength and courage seemed lent to me as by inspiration. I started, and rushing precipitately into the room, just caught his arm, and then, overcome by my own fears, I fell down at his side, breathless and senseless. My recovery, however, was, I believe, almost instantaneous, and then the sight of this unhappy man, regarding me with a look of unutterable astonishment mixed with concern, presently restored to me my recollection. I arose, though with difficulty. He did the same. The pistols, as I soon saw, were both on the floor. Unwilling to leave them, and indeed too weak to move, I leant one hand on the table, and then stood perfectly still, while he, his eyes cast wildly towards me, seemed too infinitely amazed to be capable of either speech or action. I believe we were some minutes in this extraordinary situation, but as my strength returned, I felt myself both ashamed and awkward, and moved towards the door. Pale and motionless, he suffered me to pass, without changing his posture or uttering a syllable, and indeed he looked a bloodless image of despair. When I reached the door, I turned round. I looked fearfully at the pistols, and impelled by an emotion I could not repress, I hastily stepped back, with an intention of carrying them away. But their wretched owner, perceiving my design, and recovering from his astonishment, darting suddenly down, seized them both himself. Wild with fright, and scarce knowing what I did, I caught almost involuntarily hold of both his arms, and exclaimed, "Oh, sir, have mercy on yourself!" The guilty pistols fell from his hands, which, disengaging from me, he fervently clasped, and cried, "Sweet Heaven! Is this thy angel?" Encouraged by such gentleness, I again attempted to take the pistols, but with a look half frantic, he again prevented me, saying, "What would you do?" "Awaken you," I cried with a courage I now wonder at, "to worthier thoughts, and rescue you from perdition." I then seized the pistols. He said not a word. He made no effort to stop me. I glided quick by him, and tottered downstairs ere he had recovered from the extremest amazement. The moment I reached again the room I had so fearfully left, I threw away the pistols, and flinging myself on the first chair, gave free vent to the feelings I had most painfully stifled, in a violent burst of tears, which indeed proved a happy relief to me. In this situation I remained some time, but when at length I lifted up my head, the first object I saw was the poor man who had occasioned my terror, standing as if petrified at the door, and gazing at me with eyes of wild wonder. I started from the chair, but trembled so excessively that I almost instantly sunk again into it. He then, though without advancing, and in a faltering voice, said, "Whoever or whatever you are, relieve me, I pray you, from the suspense under which my soul labours, and tell me if indeed I do not dream." To this address, so singular and so solemn, I had not then the presence of mind to frame any answer, but as I presently perceived that his eyes turned from me to the pistols, and that he seemed to intend regaining them, I exerted all my strength, and saying, "Oh, for heaven's sake, forbear!" I rose and took them myself. "Do my senses deceive me?" cried he. "Do I live? And do you?" As he spoke, he advanced towards me, and I, still guarding the pistols, retreated, saying, "No, no, you must not have them." "Why? For what purpose, tell me, do you withhold them?" "To give you time to think, to save you from eternal misery, and I hope to reserve you from mercy and forgiveness." "Wonderful!" cried he, with uplifted hands and eyes. "Most wonderful!" For some time he seemed wrapped in deep thought, till a sudden noise of tongues below, announcing the approach of the Brangtons, made him start from his reverie. He sprung hastily forward, dropped on one knee, caught hold of my gown, which he pressed to his lips, and then, quick as lightning, he rose and flew upstairs to his own room. There was something in the whole of this extraordinary and shocking adventure really too affecting to be borne, and so entirely had I spent my spirits and exhausted my courage, that before the Brangtons reached me I had sunk on the ground without sense or motion. I believe I must have been a very horrid sight to them on their entrance into the room, for to all appearance I seemed to have suffered a violent death, either by my own rashness or the cruelty of some murderer, as the pistols had fallen close by my side. How soon I recovered I know not, but probably I was more indebted to the loudness of their cries than to their assistance, for they all concluded that I was dead, and for some time did not make any effort to revive me. Scarcely could I recollect where, or indeed what, I was, ere they poured upon me such a torrent of questions and inquiries that I was almost stunned with their vociferation. However, as soon and as well as I was able, I endeavoured to satisfy their curiosity by recounting what had happened as clearly as was in my power. They all looked aghast at the recital, but not being well enough to enter into any discussions, I begged to have a chair called and to return instantly home. Before I left them, I recommended with great earnestness a vigilant observance of their unhappy lodger, and that they should take care to keep from him, if possible, all means of self-destruction. Monsieur Dubois, who seemed extremely concerned at my indisposition, walked by the side of the chair and saw me safe to my own apartment. The rashness and the misery of this ill-fated young man engross all my thoughts. If indeed he is bent upon destroying himself, all efforts to save him will be fruitless. How much do I wish it were in my power to discover the nature of the malady which thus maddens him, and to offer or to procure alleviation to his sufferings. I am sure, my dearest sir, you will be much concerned for this poor man, and were you here, I doubt not but you would find some method of awakening him from the error which blinds him, and of pouring the balm of peace and comfort into his afflicted soul. We will pause there. What drama have we undergone, and who is this mysterious emo gentleman? Until tomorrow, good night.